games.
Welcome into another episode of Triple Zeros. I'm your host, Josh Buckhalter. Follow me on Twitter at JoshGBuck. Hit up the Facebook page, Jukes Jumpers. Hit up the website, jukesjumpers.wordpress.com. And, of course, the email address is jukesjumps@gmail.com. Going to get right into it, man. It's the last show before the new year. So we're going to hit a lot of topics really fast because it's also late. And we're going to give a quick synopsis of the end of decade for the two local teams, the Chicago Bulls and Chicago Bears, both that have such a major part of my heart, but have caused me so much pain over the past 10 years. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. First things first, the NFL playoffs are starting this weekend. We're not going to get into the matchups just yet, not too deep. We'll talk about them briefly, but I want to get into some of the accomplishments from the season. And two notable ones that really stand out. Christian McCaffrey of the Carolina Panthers joined the 1,000 on 1,000 club, 1,000 yards on the ground, 1,000 yards through the air. Third in NFL history, joined Marshall Faulk, my favorite running back of all time. But I'm getting sidetracked because I want to talk about the juxtaposition of that, his success, with Jameis Winston joining the 30 and 30 club, 30 touchdowns and 30 interceptions, first to do that. So, on the one hand, you have McCaffrey, who is joining elite company with Falk and Tomlinson, but then you have Jameis starting his own club altogether. Now, obviously, Jameis is a club of infamy more than it is something that you want to shoot, or notoriety, something that you want to shoot for. But I think it's really one to look at because there's so many quarterbacks that get knocked for being averse to taking a risk. Derek Carr is one of them. And actually, this is a pretty good poll question I might tweet out. Would you rather have Jameis Winston, who seemingly has the evergreen, or would you rather have a Derek Carr, who we've seen his head coach, John Gruden, give him looks this season because he wasn't getting the ball down the field, taking chances like he should have? That's a really interesting question. And then it gets even more interesting when you get comments like what Bruce Arians said about Winston, in that if they won with him, of course they won with another quarterback. Now, clearly, we all know how Arians talks. He's really matter-of-factly, but he's also honest. This is a system that's been proven before, Jameis. I don't know what prompted that question. Maybe they felt like it was because of the way the team is set up and how much they've invested in Winston. But at the same time, like I said, Bruce is a proven guy. Winston was not his pick. And as much as Jameis is my boy, 30-30, man, that's rough. 33 touchdowns to be specific, but 30 interceptions? That's crazy. And, I mean, you start to see the comparisons because people are a little upset or taken aback by the fact that you got so much Winston flat going out, but not, Peyton Manning was on a very similar track to his first 5 seasons in the NFL. But the big difference is Peyton was winning and making the playoffs. Now, he was 0 for 3 in the playoffs at that point in time, but he was making the playoffs. And I think that that's something that can't be underestimated because you want to like the statistical part. That's where you got to take the whole thing. I always say, the famous quote, numbers never lie. They don't lie. But they only give you the part of the story that the person giving them to you wants you to know. And this is one of those things where, yeah, they have similar stats along those counting numbers, but winning is what ultimately matters most, especially the coaches, because if they don't win, they don't, coaches, for all the passing yards a player may have, the coach doesn't win, the coach gets fired. So, from the eyes of an organization, from a fan base, from everybody but the individual, because even his teammates will probably be more happy with wins than him having the yards. Of course, maybe not receivers, because they get those passing yards too. They get the receiving yards. But everyone else wants to win. So when it comes down to it, as much as you want to compare the two of Jameis and Peyton, it's no comparison because, again, Peyton was making the playoffs. Now, again, 0 for 3. But he was making the playoffs. Now I just don't think that can be overlooked. Now, it's also funny because neither one of these teams are making the playoffs. The Panthers had moments where they were looking like they could do it. They were playing most of the year with backup Kyle Allen, with Cam Newton out with a foot injury. And at one point, it looked like Allen would be the successor and Newton would be moving on. Well, flash forward, they Panthers started Will Grier this weekend. That didn't go well. That's because Allen had also flamed out, and it looks at least possible that Cam could be back now. David Tepper's already started cleaning house. Ron Rivera's gone. Possible that they go with another quarterback. It's actually probably pretty likely. But it's also true that Cam is the best quarterback on that roster right now. So maybe they even try to work out some sort of restructuring of his contract or something like that. He's a fan favorite still, a local favorite, and if nothing else, I think he would be a good transitional, or a bridge between the current culture there and David Tepper, who's trying to instill his own brand, his own legacy in the organization, which is understandable. It's just one of those things. And then obviously the Buccaneers just can't seem to get out from under those turnovers. They're dooming them, and Jameis led the league in passing, but those turnovers doom you. He had 7 pick sixes. That's insane. And it just, again, you can't help but see that those teams are struggling with those two guys having such, well, in the McCaffrey's case, a dominant season, and in Winston's case, a polarizing season. But if they were together, I can't help but think that that would be a great match. The passing prowess of Winston to take some of the heat out of the box, some of the buys out of the box on McCaffrey. McCaffrey being there for a check down to take it to the distance for Winston, so he doesn't have to go and risk the biscuit every single time. That would be a match made in heaven. It's just interesting that those two are in the same division and reaching different levels of notoriety, both on struggling teams, but really talented players. I obviously McCaffrey's not going anywhere. That's not what I'm trying to get at. I'm just saying that it's a weird pairing of accomplishments to talk about in one season. And then again, that brings me to that poll question that I really think I'm going to tweet that out tomorrow about, would you rather have Jameis, especially here in Chicago, as Bears fans, with dealing with Trubisky, who might actually be somewhere in between the two of these guys, believe it or not? Would you rather have Jameis or Derek Carr? And then maybe I'll follow up that tweet with, is Trubisky in the middle of these two guys? Carr had over 70% completion around that mark. He had his best statistical season by far, and yet and still, as I mentioned, he was getting glares from his coach for not taking the chances down the field. And with Winston, it's the opposite. He's taking too many chances. You want him to kind of reel it in a little bit. And then with Carr, it's, go further. Where is that happy medium? And is it a matter of them switching systems? Could that be something that actually ultimately works out for both parties, all parties involved? That's something that I would be interested in seeing come the offseason. Neither team has finalized any decision on what they're going to do at the quarterback spot, but both teams have kind of let it be known that it's a chance that they move on from both of these guys. It would be really interesting to see what they do if they were to switch places. I think that really it could just be a matter of new place, new face, and just that difference in philosophy is kind of weird, really, that you have these two guys in such different contrasting situations, but really sound like they could be better ready-made for either one, because in Oakland, John Gruden, we know he's going to run the ball. Derek Carr the Raiders had fewer pass attempts than the Bears did this year. Come on now. So, and then the Buccaneers have no running game, really, no consistent running game to speak of. So I think that would be one, if you get a swapping as we sometimes see with positions and teams, with players and teams, that would be one that I think would be interesting to watch going forward. And then a quick wrap up of Black Monday. You had some firings already. Freddie Kitchens got let go. Pat Shermer from the Giants got let go. Rumor has it that Mike McCarthy might resurface in Cleveland. But the interesting one was Jason Garrett on the Dallas Cowboys. He was meeting with the Joneses this morning, had some exit meetings, and then there was no decision made. They announced that they would be making no decision, and now he's conducting exit meetings with the rest of the players tomorrow. His contract also expires on January 15th, so they may not even announce a firing. They just let the contract expire and go their separate ways. But it's kind of odd that all of this was announced only to have no announcement. That's a press conference to announce that there would be no press conference. That's a bit odd, and it almost seems obvious. And then the best part about it is that you have Cowboys Twitter a little worried and anxious that they might retain everybody. I think a lot of fans especially want to see a clean house after they needed some help. They got there. They won their last game to finish 8-8, but they put themselves in a position to need so much help. And I think that turned a lot of the fans off finally, once and for all, with Jason Garrett, who's been there and has become known as Coach Clapp. As a person who's seen his fair share of futility go on, we'll cover that in a second, that's a tough pill to swallow, especially if the it's just a tough pill to swallow, to be honest with you. I don't think that there's really any other way to put it, because you just know that there's so much talent on that team, but they can't seem to overcome the counterpunch, something that we saw here in Chicago a lot this season. And then touching on the matchups real quick, and I'll go more into these on Thursday's episode, but real quick, the ones that I'm looking forward to the most are the Titans and the Patriots. Mike Vrabel taking on his mentor, Bill Belichick. The revitalized Ryan Tannehill taking on the ageless one, Tom Brady. That's just a great matchup for Wild Card Weekend. The running game of the Titans taking on the Patriots defense, who was showing some leaks against mobile quarterbacks, which Tannehill is still a mobile quarterback, and he's found some new life for this passing game. But the Patriots secondary has been maybe exposed by either we'll find out if it was the physicality, the physical traits of Devontae Parker last week, or if it was the willingness of Ryan Fitzpatrick to actually test him. But Stephon Gilmore gave up plenty of yardage, and A.J. Brown's been on the heater. Would not be surprised to see that continue this weekend. It'll be interesting to see if the Patriots can get back to their winning ways, or their lockdown ways. We know how they do. It's the second season. It's the real season for the Patriots. I wouldn't be surprised to see them lock this thing up and make the Titans once again be a one and done. Neither outcome would surprise me, just because it's been such a wild season for the Patriots, and the Titans have just surprised me the whole way. And then the other match I'm looking forward to is Vikings-Saints. I don't think I really need to explain it anymore, but if you don't know, the New Orleans Miracle, Minnesota Miracle, look it up. Stephon Diggs, Marcus Williams, that famous, that it was all over the interwebs when he was doing the missed tackle there. I can't wait to see both of these matchups. Now, you also have the Eagles playing the Seahawks. They will be hosting the Seahawks. And you all have the Bills and the Texans. That one's one to keep an eye on, too, because the Texans secondary is still Swiss cheese despite all of those first-round picks that they have back there. And shout out to Whitney Merciless, though, who just signed a contract extension. But that secondary is suspect. And the ground game can be suspect. Now, the Bills do have a weakness in the ground game, but they have a very locked-down secondary. So if the receivers are having issue getting separation and getting open against that tough secondary of Buffalo's, don't be surprised if you see the Bills come away with this one with a win. I'm just saying, I like the Texans. I like Deshaun Watson. If you follow, you know how much I am a fan of his. But I'm also a person who thinks that his team is very poorly constructed and has very obvious flaws that will get exposed quickly in the postseason. And I think that happens. You know what? I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's going to happen. Buffalo's my upset special this weekend. I don't think the Titans are going to win. I want to see that game. Don't think they're going to win. Vikings Saints is kind of too close to call. It is in New Orleans, so I'm going to go with the Saints because the Vikings on the road. I just don't trust Kirk Cousins that way, even though it is in a dome. And then Eagles, Seahawks. That one's tough. I want to pick the Seahawks because I trust Russ a little bit more, but he looked bad against the 49ers, and Carson Wentz has looked better with a bunch of pieces. So that's a toss-up too. The NFC games seem to both be toss-ups, but I have decisions for the AFC. Pats and Buffalo with the upset, which means it's an AFC showdown. Or there's a possibility of an AFC East showdown further on down the road. And then shout out real quick before we switch gears to Justin Tucker of the Baltimore Ravens and Drew Lock of the Denver Broncos, kicker and quarterback respectively. Tucker, after hitting a field goal, hit the bop, the baby, if you know the video. And then the best one though, personal favorite, Drew Lock just became a fan of this young man. Caught on the sideline singing Jeezy. When I say he was on the sideline singing Jeezy, I don't mean he was, mouthing along the words and nodding his head. I mean he was full on, hands were out. Drew Lock gained a fan that day. That was a good video. Love to see players on the side, especially a quarterback getting loose, a young quarterback, rooting for that young man. He's also got his head coach, his former Bears defensive coordinator, Vic Fangio. So, of course, I was a fan anyway, but I'm just saying now I'm officially a fan. And this is, of course, Triple Zero's podcast. We're going to switch gears real quick to the NBA before we wrap up. And, of course, I'm not forgetting the Bears. We're going to wrap the whole thing up with the Bears and the Bulls decade because it really does go together. But switching gears to the NBA, Dwayne Dedmon of the Sacramento Kings requests a trade, and he's being investigated by the NBA for doing so. It wasn't just that he requested a trade, it's that he did so through the Sacramento Bee, saying that he was not being played and that he would prefer to go to a team where his talents would be better appreciated. Now, Dedmon's averaging 4 points this year after averaging 10 points last year with Atlanta, and while there's not a lot of teams that would use him, I know the Bulls could actually use some backup rim protection, even though I like Daniel Gafford, so maybe let me take that back. Maybe not here. So that's even less places. Like I said, not too many places that are just jumping out as immediate options off the top of my head right now. I'm sure there are some. They're not coming to me right now. But he hasn't played in 10 of their last 12 games, and he played 7 minutes in the 2 games that he has played. So it's not going well. The problem is that he did it publicly, and that is a violation of the CBA. So it'll be interesting to see how that happened, because it was a $50,000 fine for Rich Paul when he made the public announcement for Anthony Davis. I don't know. Dwayne Dedmon, he went from being one of those highly sought after role players to kind of just being a forgotten man in the great odd forward signing of the Kings that was only outdone by the great forward hoarding of the New York Knicks. So maybe they're waiting for the moment where a team really desperately needs another forward, a stretch 5. I like Dedmon. I hope he resurfaces. He's 30 years old. He's not old, so it's not that. That's just he's averaged 6 points, 5 rebounds, just under 6 rebounds. In 373 games, he's been with the Magic, with the Spurs, with the Sixers, with the Warriors, with the Hawks, and now the Kings, and looking to move on to another team. Hopefully he gets his way, and hopefully he doesn't get too dinged in the pocket for making that public trade request. Speaking of trade requests, Karl-Anthony Towns is now back in the news because there's rumors that he might be looking to get moved if he's not happy in Minnesota, and that the Warriors are monitoring his situation. That's interesting because the Warriors currently have D'Angelo Russell on the roster, and as we all know, the Minnesota Timberwolves tried to acquire D'Angelo Russell this offseason to no avail. Now, the interesting thing here is, what deal could the Warriors put together that doesn't require them giving up Russell? I'm not really sure that there is one. Remember, Russell signed that max contract as well. I'm not really sure if there is one. Now, I would be interested in seeing D'Angelo Russell and Andrew Wiggins tandem, just because they're two different styles, but two offensive, what can be juggernauts when they're on. But I would also imagine that just has to be heartbreaking for both Russell and Cat, who both want to play with each other because they are among the best of friends, but can't seem to get this thing to just match up the right way. That's tough, man. That's tough. But at the same time, I'm not sure that the Warriors have enough to give up without giving up Russell or another one of those key pieces. They don't have enough young guys. They don't have the picks for it that would be valuable enough. I'm just not sure that there's a deal there for them that makes sense other than Russell. And again, these players will have no final say in it. Ultimately, they play where they play. They played without each other the whole time. They can still be friends without that. It's just one of those things that has to suck when it comes down to it, because you've been trying, in the era of teaming up, you've been trying to do it yourself, and you just can't seem to get it to click. That sucks. And then Kyrie Irving's back in the news with a little bit more drama. As you know, he's been out with a shoulder injury. And Rick Bucher went on The Fan to talk about how it's possible that it's not. He's hearing from credible sources that it's a mental thing as well. And this is all being fueled on by Kyrie not speaking to the media. He's well past his deadline of supposed to be required to speak. The coach is not speaking on it, but the coach is actually denying these reports that it's mental. And Kyrie's been great. We had the reports earlier that he was already becoming moody and this, that, and the third. My whole issue is with this, and it's really quick and really simple. I'm not sure how much I really expected him to be out there without Kevin Durant. I know he did the big rollout with "I'm home" and all this, and everybody was, while Katie is out, we'll get some Kyrie, and he gets to be the man and show why he's the man, this, and third. He didn't team up with KD to show why he's the man. He teamed up to at least, at best, be a co-star. At best, be the co-star. So for all the success that the Nets had last year, and they had a lot of success without Kyrie, and the appearance that it had messed up their mojo because they were not as good with him. I think we know what kind of player Kyrie is. I've made this reference often. I'm making it again. He's not Batman, but he's not Robin. He's more like Nightwing, right? He's better than Robin. He's really, really good. He's just not great, and he's not that. When you need to be great to lead a team. At best, Kyrie is going to be able to be a Nightwing, and he can be a fill-in Batman. He can be like Azrael. We're getting a little nerdy here, but he can be that fill-in guy when the star has a down night. But they're banking on KD being at its worst case scenario. KD comes back and he's as good as Kyrie. The impact is the same because they can't be expecting Kyrie to be the best player. So hopefully the medicine has advanced enough to the point where KD can come back and be that player that they expect him to be, because like I'm saying, everybody's putting all this, well, Kyrie should be playing and all this stuff, and he's moody and he wants to be out, and I see why he's gotten traded. I just don't think that he wants. Why play without KD? What for? Save the minutes save the miles on your legs and get yourself healthy and come back and play with KD, and you guys go ahead and run roughshod over the East, because that's going to be nasty. That's all I'm saying. I've been a fan of what they've been doing for some time. I was a fan of it last year with Russell. I was a bigger fan when they went out and got KD and Kyrie. I'm not certain that it'll work. These are two of the moodiest dudes I've ever seen in your life, but I am intrigued by it, and I do like the pairing. Before we get out of here, I do have to do the end of decade wrap up for the Bulls and the Bears, the Chicago teams that have the biggest pieces of my heart. The Bears piece is already done. It'll be out on Last Word on Pro Football in the morning sometime, perhaps morning, mid-afternoon. And it really just kind of had to look back at 2019. I recently wrote that 2019 was everything that 2018 wasn't, in terms of how the Bears got all those breaks, health, and the turnovers, and they just didn't get any of that this past season. But looking at it and looking at it from a game-by-game basis and all the ups and downs, and even if it was some fool's gold and some of the success, it really was a microcosm, especially finishing at 8-8, a microcosm of this decade as a whole. The reaching the plateaus that they reached, the heights that they reached, following that Super Bowl run. 4 years, I started off the article this way. 4 years after they made that Super Bowl run, they went back to the playoffs and had their hearts ripped out in that conference championship game against the Packers. That was tough, and it's been tough ever since. And you just see them build up and then fall. And they've had 3 seasons with double-digit wins in the past decade. Each one of those seasons was followed by an 8-8. You can't make this stuff up, folks. Okay? The other issue that I had, this one was the most concerning, was that the fall off that we saw offensively from Matt Nagy's first year to his second year was on par and really not as hard to see coming as it was when it happened to Mark Trestman. What Matt Nagy had going for him was the defense didn't really fall off. It did regress, but it didn't fall off, and that kind of saved his bacon a little bit. We know, if you watch any of the games, you saw how often the defense kept the offense in the game. But that fall off in the offense is troublesome because it shows there's a flaw in either the scheme, the personnel, or the execution, and likely all three. I've already detailed how they have to work on the offensive line, the quarterback, and while the pass catchers could use a tweaking here or there, Taylor Gabriel, I do think that they have the talent in that position group to be successful. They do need a tight end, though. But none of that will matter. Even if you upgrade the offensive line, I think that they will ultimately be hindered by their quarterback. That's a thing that's been consistent with them for forever. Their greatest quarterback is Sid Luckman. So that should tell you all you need to know. The Jay Cutler years were wasted between his moody behavior rubbing fans the wrong way, the injury that knocked him out of that playoff game, and people turning on him completely, and his, again, moodiness, not really being there to fight for himself. It's something to be said for standing up for yourself in the media. I think fans like that defiance, and it's kind of one of the things that has soured everybody on Trubisky as fast as it has. While a lot of the people around him say that they like his attitude and he took command of the huddle, there's a lot of times in press conferences where he seems timid, where he's told you that he's been coached on what to say, and where he's just looked like he's had no answers. That is not going to work, especially in a city that will grade you harshly on a curve like Chicago does. It's just amazing to me how much 2019 really did represent the entire decade for the Chicago Bears. And then you go to the Chicago Bulls, and it didn't get much better. That was the worst part. The Bulls, and just a quick synopsis of what the Bulls have gone through, because this piece is still in development right now. But the Bulls were they have only had a positive relative offensive rating. Okay, so their offensive rating in comparison to the rest of the NBA, they've only had a positive one 3 times the past decade. 3 times. Not to be outdone, the decade prior, though, they only had 1 time. So I guess that's an improvement. But they just barely reached it this year at 0.1 with the offensive up. We've talked about the tempo changes. Pippen ain't easy. I always try to rush through that, and I always stumble across. But we've seen them struggle to shoot. As woeful as the defense was, we saw them put the ball in the basket in bunches last year, especially Lauri Markkanen. Well, we've seen him take such a step back this year, and we've seen them struggle to find anything. They're low 20s in field goal percentage, but they're like middle of the pack in 3-point. It's really strange. They struggled from the free throw line. Again, like I mentioned, they can't get much from Lowry, and it's just wild to see them have gone through all these struggles. Now, one thing that they have been consistent through back since the Scott Skiles days, really, but they have had a positive defensive rating relative to the rest of the NBA in 7 of the past 10 years as well. So you give some, you take some, but the NBA is an offensive league. So for all that great defense that played well in the 90s, and this is really a knock on John Paxson without trying to be, that's kind of where we ended up, because that's been what the rub on them has been, is that they're kind of stuck in that old era of basketball. And we are now in an era where you have to score points. And they went from Fred Hoiberg, who was supposed to be their offensive guru, to a Jim Boylan, who has the appearance and the sound and the mannerisms of a defensive guy. And you see the results. The Bulls right now have their highest relative defensive rating since 2013-14 season. So, and they're I'm not sure if they're still tops, but they're up there in steals. We've seen the defense become better, but they can't score. One and done trips, lack of ball movement, just horrible offense altogether. Poor rotations, guys standing around watching Zach try to create something. That's what we've seen in the past decade. No matter who's been at the helm, no matter who's been on the floor, there's been something missing, minus those Derrick Rose years. Minus that time when D Rose was able to wow the NBA and the city of Chicago more than anything. We saw that this team, there's always a piece. They're just short. The trade away of LaMarcus Aldridge for Tyrese Thomas, the trading of Yusef Nurkic and Gary Harris for Doug McDermott and who else? Mitchell Robinson. These are things that in the moment don't seem bad, and in a vacuum might not be terrible, but when you accumulate them and then you have nothing positive really to offset that. And then your fallback is, Derek's injury. It's not an excuse, but Derek's injury. And we heard some of that, not to go back, but we heard some of that from Ryan Pace. We're going to probably hear some of that from Ryan Pace, but that Akeem Hicks injury, that kind of hurt them. And it did, but these are people put in the position that they are to make contingency plans. And the biggest problem that I think I've had with Chicago, with these two organizations, is the failure to have a contingency plan for when things inevitably go wrong. At best, when these teams have been at their best, they've been paper thin. What sunk Mark Trestman? Jay Cutler getting hurt. No viable backup. It's really been quarterback all along for everybody since Angelo, but since before that, obviously. But these are the things that winning organizations do. The Bulls used to do these types of things. Honestly, they didn't. They had Mike and Pip and Phil, but they've been living off of that goodwill among the fan base, and haven't been doing the things necessary to maintain their position as one of the premier organizations in the NBA. Until they realize, and this goes for the Bears too, until they realize that trying to maintain your way for the sake of your legacy is not going to get you the biscuit. No risk it, no biscuit. They're not going to go any further. And it's sad to see, because this is a founding franchise in the NBA, or in the NFL, one of the oldest franchises, 1960s, for the Bulls. These are two teams that should be prominent. The market, second largest market, third largest market. Come on, you can't have these teams be major market franchises being ran like small market teams, and that's what we have now. For the Bulls, there's been the stories about Chairman Jerry Reinsdorf and his son, and how they're more focused on the White Sox success, and we've seen the White Sox make a lot of moves this offseason. Maybe there's some truth to that. Hopefully they win so they can get back to focusing on the Bulls. As far as the Bears, there's not much help there, because they keep switching people out to run it, but it's somebody in the family. It was Ted Phillips, and now it's the Thompson, and then you go to the McCaskies. You've got this constant system where you're not changing the voice, you're just changing the messenger. The tone stays the same. I don't know how much they really expect to get out of that. It's one thing to stick with your method if it's been working. It's another thing to keep banging your head against the wall and expect a different result. As we know, that is what you call the definition of insanity. That's going to do it for this episode of Triple Zeros. Follow me on Twitter at Josh G. Buck, on Facebook at Jukes and Jumps. The website is jukesandjumpers.wordpress.com. The email address is jukesjumps@gmail.com. Read the stuff on Last Word on Pro Football and Pippin Ain't Easy. And of course, until the next time, see you when I see you. I am going to be signing out. And before I go, glad I thought about this. Happy New Year, happy holidays. Hope everybody had a wonderful, safe Christmas or whatever you celebrate. Hope everybody has a safe New Year. We're going to do this again in 2020. I'll see you then. Or I'll see you then.
I don't think the game's over.